Hello, my name is Miles Garth. I'm a senior specialist at Artnet Auctions in the photographs department. If you're joining us, this is really the second part of a conversation I'm having with David LaChapelle. Yesterday we talked about his life, his experiences, what goes into becoming an artist, the trials and tribulations and the enormous amount of success he's had. And I don't want to spoil your experience about seeing the first part, but I think to give you an encapsulation of what we talked about, it was basically that David is a very special member of the large tent that we call the world of photography. He is essentially seamless about how he moves between his art and his photography, his film, his video. He has a reputation in so many different areas of photography and advertising and in the commercial world. And where we're sitting today is Paul Kasmin Gallery on 10th Avenue and 27th Street, where David's most recent work is going to be opening up on Friday of this week. And I thought it was a good split into two parts to be able to talk about David as a person, as an artist, to get to understand how these photographs, and more importantly, why they're made, where the ideas come from, and to have a preview of his new work. So, having said that, I just want to give you a little bit of an outline of what we're going to talk about today, and those are what I call the sort of the 3 or 4 main components of what makes a photographer an artist, a painter, an artist, but somebody who has that name of artist associated with him. And there are 3 or 4 major components of that. Certainly one would be the exhibitions that an artist has produced, and that unfortunately is the most temporary part of the reputation. Exhibitions come and go. The second would be, the works that are sold out of galleries or auctions or wherever, and those works unfortunately are sort of taken off the market. They're put into private homes, or they're purchased by museums and often shown, but many times put in storage until they're needed to be seen by the public. And then we have the books, the publications, and those are probably, in some ways, the most important part of the legacy an artist can leave, because we can always go back to our bookshelf and look at some of his books. And I think that the first book that David did, LaChapelle Land, in 1997, was probably, even when it came out, was considered a classic. It broke a lot of rules. It really exposed his work to a broad public. And I think we're going to start our conversation by just talking about what that book was about and how you perceived it and what happened.
Yeah, that was right at the time where I had fully embraced color photography after having been, working in galleries and Interview magazine, which is all black and white, and doing my printing. I learned color printing, and at the time, as I told you before, this opportunity to work in magazines fell into my lap with Interview magazine. Right? I had the show 303, and then people came from Interview and said, "Would you, want to work?" And of course, I did. It was like the most important magazine. It was Andy, his magazine. He was alive then, and so that was really exciting, to be a part of that. But it was all black and white at that time. So I learned color, and started getting other work from magazines and things, and the predominant look of that time, it was black and white, Bruce Weber, Herb Ritts in the magazine world, and then grunge. This is in the 90s now, sort of the grunge kind of thing. And I wanted to just do the opposite. I wanted to see color, and I wanted to see saturated. I wanted to see things that were very fantastical and magic, and just blow up that World magazine, do something completely different than what was sort of the look that was sort of that time, So I just started doing these pictures, and we were on a roll. We were making pictures like crazy and working, around the clock. And when you're in your 20s, you have that insane energy, and you do that, And we still have the marathon shoots today, but that was the norm then, And so when the book came out, it was really nice to really have it all in one place. So, because it was so scattered, and a lot of the pictures were being published in England or wherever, and see them all together made a pretty strong statement. And then the publisher even turned up the colors a tiny bit more in the printing process. He really wanted them to pop even more. That kind of, just really kind of put things on, in a different gear, shifted gears with that publication, and opened doors, and it was working, but there's still always that fear that you're going to go out of fashion or style or whatever. And initially, I loved color, but it was also a reaction to all the black and white and the grunge and stuff around me, those pictures. And then just, taking celebrity and deconstructing it a bit and flipping it around, and putting people in weird scenarios that related to them. It was never just random. It was always about that person in some weird way, which is easier with more established artists like David Bowie or something, but it's more difficult with a brand new pop star who doesn't have a look or a history to pull from. But putting people into these scenarios and sets and conceptually driven, along with how it looked, was really a blast. And we were a great, my crew and I just, did everything together. You get to know these people like family. You're traveling all over the place. When I was a kid, I ran away from home when I was 15, not because of my parents, because of school, being bullied. And when I came to New York, I was 15. I'd walk up and down Fifth Avenue back when they had the old travel agencies, those big, all the posters. I wanted to see the world, and so one of my first gigs was Condé Nast Traveler. So I worked for them for about 10 years and did lots of coverage from all over the world. Back then, it was before the computer, so you could lie and say, "Oh, the weather's terrible," and extend your stay, and get to stay longer in some really exotic place.
I've got to remember that, except it's too late now.
Yeah,
because they can look at you and now
they can tell the weather. They just go to the
by the block.
Yes, exactly. So I got to see the world, and learn how to shoot under any conditions. So I was really my schooling, learning how to communicate in magazines. And learning how to stop somebody to pay. What I wanted to do was get people to stop in a magazine. And, they're going like this, and you want them to be like, what the hell, That's what I wanted. I was competing with the other images in that magazine, so I'd think about the context of how they'd be shown. Mm-hmm. And a healthy competition, and the other photographers, too, would try to do their thing. It was kind of like a really good time for magazine publications. There was a lot of really interesting things going on. But once I left galleries and, really blew up in the magazine publishing world, I really never thought I could come back to galleries. I thought that was a burnt bridge.
That's interesting.
Well, I just very separate then.
But I should correct something I did say right at the beginning. LaChapelle Land was actually earlier than I had said. I had said 98, but it was 96. Mm-hmm. And just for the record, you've done 27 books, not including the catalog that just came out today on this show. And that's basically almost 2 books a year, or 2 publications a year. I don't know too many photographers that could put that on their resume. Not that it's important, and not that it makes a Guinness Book of World Records, but it's certainly, with everything else that was going on, books are not easy to do. I mean, they're collaborative projects.
And some of them I was involved with. very, very heavily, like LaChapelle Land.
Right.
And others, were put together by museums where I had very little to do with, or if anything. There's some of those books you speak of that I really, were a surprise to me, and I was very happy to see someone else curate, something and lay it out in a way that I would never have thought of, or group pictures in a way I never would have done.
Yeah, I think, even the term or the thought of a darkroom right now is really foreign and almost ancient to a lot of photographers. And it really has taken us away from the craft and the understanding of light and dark and how light works on light-sensitive material. That whole chapter of the technical part of it.
I'm glad that I don't have to go to a darkroom anymore, and I do love digital photography because I think it's it's just friendlier in a lot of ways, not just environmentally, but it's just different way of working. The new cameras are fantastic, but I shoot as if it was analog. I try to make everything there. I don't want to spend a lot of time in front of a computer because I grew up in the analog days. It had to be there for it to work, and it's really important for me to not be dependent. To use it as a tool, digital manipulation, but to not be dependent on it, and to know that it is a collaboration. So I don't want to give credit to a machine when it is really, people that created these sets, that scenic them, that worked on them, and we took the time, and it's a lot of, it's an expensive way to work, and I don't just mean in money, it's an expensive way to work in time, and people's time.
Well, and energy and the thought process. About how you're going to figure it out.
And I think of photography very analog, and for me it's exciting to do, the shoot's exciting. It's not exciting to sit in front of a screen. So I try to make my pictures. I'm still in the analog state of mind, even though the equipment is digital.
Well, even more analog, let's talk a little bit about exhibitions, because I know that your first exhibition, at least in public, which was not at a gallery, or maybe 303 came just before this, but at the Palladium, of all places, in 1986.
Yeah, that was after 303.
Yeah. So it's the progression from a private small gallery to this
nightclub,
but it was also.
But it was a great nightclub because you had
the
Michael Todd room with these giant Jean-Michel Basquiat's, and Francesco Clemente had this beautiful alcove. Keith Haring had this huge mural in there. Kenny Scharf had his own room. So you had all these artists. Barbara Kruger had great pieces downstairs by the bar. So it was really the first nightclub that Mud Club did it on a much smaller level.
Yeah, no, this was on a grand scale.
Much cool. Yeah, I don't know. It was just so different. The Mud Club was really just let's put on a show. It wasn't about promoting or
No,
nobody was making millions off the Mud Club.
The Palladium was
happening. Palladium was like a big club.
And it was the top of the line. I mean, it was basically it is a cultural icon, right?
Yeah, and Steve Rebell definitely had his finger on the pulse. He knew that artists were sort of had a value to have these sort of name artists in his space. So he'd invite them to do these permanent installations there, but. Doing a show there in '86 was really cool.
And a very significant period. I mean, in culture, in just what was going on in New York, in the clubs, in drugs, and everything else that was going on. The whole movement of the gay movement was such a part of it at that time because it was really beginning to become part of the culture. People were talking about it openly, and for a while, Palladium was a very big part of that. Reinforcement. The way I looked at it was, I started going to clubs in the late 70s. So I was 14 years old at Street of 54, and at that time it was so cool to be gay, that people who were straight would say they were bisexual just to be cool to chicks, because really at the Mud Club, they'd be like, "Oh, I'm bi," just so the chick wouldn't be like, "Oh, he's a nerd and he's a square." It was really cool to be gay. Yeah.
And then AIDS happened, and it got totally reversed. And people were ostracized and looked as these sort of contaminants, and it was really heavy. And I was right around that, right. '86 was like the real
that's
heaviest
when
year. So back then the clubs were very much more integrated than they are today. You had straight and gay, you know, a certain time in New York before I call it the tipping point, which happened sometime after, you know, 9/11, some year after that. There was sort of the tipping point where Manhattan kind of really changed, the gentrification that they were always talking about really happened. But before that, you had, you knew where to go. Like if you were a young person, you're an artist, musician, you know, just wanting to go out, you knew which night of the week, where to go, and you'd see kind of the same people. There was, you know, just a small group of people going out, maybe 1,000 or so people that were really into dancing, really into music. And it wasn't about promotion or anything else. It was a form of release and, you know, community. And you were there for the music, and you know, it wasn't about connecting, or what do you call it?
Well, it was before Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't about networking. You know, it wasn't about that at all, or promoting a product. You know, there's always a party that's launching something.
Yeah.
We just have parties, and back then they were much more integrated. So gay people, straight people, in every economic level. You know, and that's where those were the best parties. So Area, Palladium, Mud Club, Pyramid Club. You know, these places were, you know, really.
But it seems that a lot of your work reflects that. I mean, there's no way you can get away from it. I think
there was so much. It influenced me a lot.
But it's also an honesty about who you were and how it reflects in your art. I mean, there's not two different people. You know, you're not creating one thing for the public and then living a different life. I mean, it seemed to be, again, I was saying it before, that there's this seamless transition between life and your art. And then tossing in the historical references even reinforces a lot of those ideas.
Yeah, it's just things that I like. You know, it's pretty intuitive. It's not, you know, manufactured in a sort of cerebral way. It just kind of comes in a more intuitive place.
But I think that a lot of people,
an image, an idea.
A lot of people don't realize, though, that there is this very heavy undertone of the art historical references. It's almost as if when you bring them in, you're sort of comparing modern day culture and society to what was going on 200 or 300 years ago. And how artists, in a way, art was used as a reference to the times they were living in.
Yes.
Right? I mean, they weren't creating, I mean, certainly some were creating fantasies, but the bulk of the artists, they were doing portraits of famous people or the gentry, and they were buildings that were being built. And at that time, it was contemporary. And your work was you're essentially in just the art continuum. It doesn't stop.
Well, the art world likes celebrities, but they like, you know, they're not ready to really openly admit how much they like celebrities. The celebrities they do admit to really liking are people like George Clooney or Tilda Swinton. They're more cerebral, where they consider, you know, more higher end celebrity. But really, what the culture is about is the Kardashians.
Yeah.
You know, but that's not what the art world wants to embrace. Because there's still that elitism in art that exists, you know, but really what the culture is about right now, you know, in 80 countries, not just talking about America, but it's about the Kardashians, the longest running reality show in history. But, you know, that they don't want them, you know, at the
family,
table, you know,
the family you love to hate.
Yeah, you know, the art world does not want them eating from, you know, the Basel table.
Exactly. So let's talk about this new work, you know, about what this grew out of, because it's not a radical departure, but it is certainly a much more concentrated, almost personal kind of mission.
Yeah.
Not that you haven't had personal missions before, but this is a new direction.
You have different chapters in your life, and if you're just honest with yourself and you know, you do what's interesting to you, what's in your head, and hopefully, you know, you will realize what's in your head in a way that will connect with someone else. And that, for me, is always the goal. It's that communication. I want to communicate, and learning through magazines and stuff how to do that, and using color, using you know, colors that are compatible, or work together, even in opposition, but have create an atmosphere, a palette that's seductive. That for me is really, important. It comes intuitively. I don't search for it. I just I gravitate towards those things. And then you draw the viewer in, and also playing with scale, and intriguing people, because you're now, instead of other photos in a magazine, you're competing with the images of the world. And I want people to stop long enough in front of these pictures to connect, so that they're understanding what it was that I was expressing, what I was trying to communicate, and that's that's sort of the goal.
Mm-hmm. But it's, in a way, you could generalize and say that's really about all your work to some extent, that you're communicating, and then this is a new kind of communication, at least in terms of the subject. It's certainly not in terms of how you've developed it,
right.
But the subject is really focused on Earth fuels.
Yeah, even the last fashion story I did for Italian Vogue was the last fashion story I ever had published. Was I shot these women in these couture gowns in front of these destroyed houses, which looked like hurricane or tornado had come. And it was on the newsstand when Katrina happened, and people were upset because they thought it was, who didn't understand publishing. They didn't know that it took 3 months to get it onto the newsstand. So it was actually on the newsstand during Katrina. There's even a shot of girls wearing Prada kind of handing sandbags to each other in front of a levee. And the editor said, do people think these are about hurricanes? And I said, well, they are about hurricanes. It wasn't about Katrina, because I didn't know Katrina was going to happen. But, so I was, even in the fashion photographs, incorporating things that were fears or things that I was conscious of. And as I got older, things change and your thoughts change, and hopefully you mature, you grow, and you don't think the same thoughts as you did when you were in your 20s, as you did in your 30s or 40s. Your life has different chapters and takes on different resonance.
But you didn't use Louis Vuitton bags to fill with sand, and they were handing Vuitton sandbags.
No.
Because that I could see people really taking offense to.
Yeah, well, again, this was not offensive until it was published, and then it was coincided with Katrina, which everybody was kind of, it was like a 9/11 kind of situation where everybody was sort of together, like in this, not in the horror, in the shadow of this horror. But so it was time to really stop working in fashion magazines, and now, so these ideas have been on my mind, and within a gallery exhibition setting, when the purpose of the photograph is to be on the walls, and this is the ultimate, this is where they're not second generation or on a computer screen, where you can actually see the details, you see the quality of the printing, the technique that goes into it. This is the ultimate. So I want to say something, and communicate something, but I need to get people to stop for a second. And we're very rushed right now. Our lives are high speed, and I want people to slow down and stop for a second and look. And to do that, I employed, these sort of using scale and using the seductive color palette and using beauty to get people to take these in, and then hopefully connect with them, and maybe they're thinking some of the same ideas that I. And for me, that's when a piece of art is finished. That's when it accomplished. It's that magical moment when you're connecting through a visual piece of work. You're touching someone.
Well,
the way the music will touch someone.
And I think some of the new work does have a painterly quality to it. I mean, the colors and the shapes and the tones and textures are very painterly in the way they're approached and the way they come off. And when you see them at this scale, they become something beyond just, another photograph. It's beyond that. It transcends to something else. And like you said, I mean, we're so used to looking at pictures on monitors that when you're confronted with a real picture that's as big as any flat screen you're going to go see in a sports bar, I mean, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah, so for me, the opportunity to exhibit my work and have them hanging on walls, that's a, comes with it I feel like a responsibility to put something in there that is meaningful, that has, that is, and this is just personally my own kind of.
But you are. You're exposing yourself. But you're exposing yourself in public. You're exposing your work.
I want
and that comes with the responsibility.
Have something to say. Yes, it has responsibility that comes with it. That it's different from a magazine, and magazines I could do things that were just jokes, that were sometimes just funny and frivolous, and other times I didn't feel like that, but there was nothing expected of those photographs other than showing a celebrity or dress. If I wanted to put something more in, then I could. But when you're doing something for a gallery, well, I think people expect more from those pictures, and they are looking for something to feed them a bit, their consciousness, their intellect, and also, their eyes. So these gas stations are sort of, if in a new millennium, you have these archaeologists finding the key to the rise of this civilization would be those gas stations.
And the tanks underground. What have we discovered?
Everyone uses a gas station, no matter what your beliefs are politically, or what social level you're at, or how much money you have, or
or if you ride the bus,
what church or temple or mosque you go to, you go to a gas station.
Right.
So the fossil fuels have changed. Industrial revolution has had the most impact on it than any event in the history of humanity. But it's also had the greatest impact on the planet since the meteorite that caused the Ice Age, which buried the jungles, which we are now pumping back into the atmosphere. Right. So it's been the most substantial thing, the most profound thing that's happened, not only to us, human beings, and our future, but to the planet. So what would symbolize that visually for me was the gas station. Didn't realize that when I first started making them, what they really implied or what they represented. But as I was working them, of course, you just think about what am I doing, and that's what they represented for me. They really represented this great change. It's sort of.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also when we had Sandy, and you saw the news reports and the lines at gas stations, the dependency.
Right.
Then it hits home, because you see people waiting in line for 2, 3, 4 hours to get a few gallons of gas because they started to ration it.
Right.
And it sort of reminded me of what was going on in the early 70s when there was this gas crisis, this oil crisis, and the government was really thinking about rationing again, which hadn't gone on since World War II. Right. And how do you get a society that's 30 years, 40 years away from World War II when everything is rationed? Food, butter, milk, and then all of a sudden, how are you going to tell a modern society you can't have what you want when you go to the store?
Yeah.
And it's like the gas stations. I mean, they start cutting back, and we can't import gas from another planet or oil, at least not yet. And I don't know if that'll ever happen. But you're right. We have, the question is it a renewable resource or not?
Well, you think a lot when you're in this sort of bubble and you're creating a series of work, and we're living in an extremely decadent time, and that doesn't mean decadence doesn't just mean like the sort of stereotypical idea of decadence of caviar and limousines. It's just, I think I told this story before about being in Maui, and we're in the rainforest, and going to the other side for supplies, the other side of the island, 3 hours away. And I went to a Costco for the first time, and there was all these watermelons that were, genetically modified, and there was 5 of them in this plastic kind of netting bag, and they were from Argentina, and they were $4.99 for all 5 of them. How is that possible? That's extreme decadence, that we can buy food that's been imported from Argentina, shipped, grown, fertilized with petrochemicals, pesticides, which are from petrochemicals, shipped, which takes to get it to Maui, of all places, where
And the
everything
people-
grows.
and the people at the
and
cash
we just
register.
accept this. So
Yeah.
we're living in this incredibly decadent time, whether we're living the high life or what we just think is normal by shopping at a Costco, but to be able to buy these perfectly shaped watermelons, the pineapple became the symbol
Of Hawaii.
in Louis XVI's time
Yes.
of great wealth, because
That's
to
right.
get a pineapple shipped, it means it came from the tropics, and so it became the symbol of hospitality. And so that you'd see the pineapple motif, and because that was only for the very wealthy. But now we can get food from all over the world at any time. Even in a place like Maui where everything grows. But how could this be so inexpensive? The tab is coming. The bill is going to arrive at the table very soon. We have to pay the bill. You can't live like this forever. Yeah. So these pictures became more profound as I worked on them. I started understanding why I was making them as I worked on them, and what they represented. The kind of most important event in the history of human beings, and the biggest change to the planet since the last meteorite caused the Ice Age. We've changed the composition of the atmosphere. So they took on this other sort of depth as I worked on them. I started understanding them because I was reading more and more about things and understanding what was going on and where we are, in the world. And these changes are already happening. So we'd have to have a massive, enlightenment. We're in the dark ages right now, and we'd have to, everyone would have to have a mass enlightenment, for us to get past this and to figure this out, to put our great minds together of the scientists and really come up with a solution. So these pictures were that's what I was running through my head as we were working on them, And
well, I think
that doesn't mean you can't have humor and things like that either.
No. And I think your work is filled with all kinds of pathos and humor and satire and everything else. And I think it's a good place to sort of wrap up that this exhibition is really a different side of David in terms of his thought process, but it is really in line with so much of what he's done in the past. And I think the opportunity for people who are within reachable distance of Paul Kasmin will really appreciate seeing this new work. I think it's a healthy departure, which is not a radical change. It is just the next stage in a career. It's people will be maybe surprised at first, but they will then begin to make the connections of any of the work that David is known for from the past. You're in for a treat. You're not in for a great shock. So, having said that, this is the end of part 2. We could probably go to a part 3 or 4, but time and money is always a problem. And I want to thank all of you for viewing, and I hope you'll visit artnet.com to see this interview, the other interviews we've done, our auctions that we have online 24/7, our galleries, our price database, which we're world known for, and all of the other products and services we provide. Thanks very much. David, what a great talk.
Thanks.